Another story, also reporting out of from media. Well, media is just reporting it from someone else. A Republican, get this, guys, has called on the Attorney General Pam Bondi, basically Fox News side host who sometimes acts as the Attorney General, to denaturalize and deport Zohran Mamdani over rap lyrics. Yes, they would like him to be denaturalized, for him to lose his U.S. citizenship and be deported. This is Representative Andy Ogles of the great state of Tennessee, citing lyrics from a rap song that Mamdani made back in 2021. And as you remember, we talked to Mr. Mamdani about the fact that he used to be a rapper called DJ Cardamom. And in that era of his life, he did a song in which he talked about the Holy Land Five. They're members of a Muslim charity organization called the Holy Land Foundation. The 5 men were convicted in 2008 for providing material support to Hamas. The families of the convicted, as well as some human rights groups, including Human Rights Watch, have questioned the ruling and called for the release of the men. I will note that this was a charity that raised money for Palestinians and operated with some of the very same entities that the federal government operated with in order to provide charitable relief to Palestinians. But of course, in this country, there's a strong prohibition against being friendly to the Palestinians. We're going to be following up on that story right here on this show, so keep a weather eye out for that. But the other big story in the news right now is the question of whether the Supreme Court is going to do more than what Mr. Ogles would like to do to Mr. Mamdani, meaning take away his citizenship. And he's a naturalized citizen. Mr. Ogles would like to reverse that so that he can be deported. But this aggressive move to deport any brown or black person that this regime can get their hands on in order to meet Stephen Miller's 3,000 brown person a day quota. They have a literal quota that ICE is required to meet, which is the reason why they are stopping and frisking brown, particularly brown people, but brown and black people anywhere they can get them. Dodger Stadium, the parking lot at Disneyland, at restaurants, Home Depots, warehouses, anywhere they can get them. And if you've had so much as a parking ticket, they grab you and they immediately deport you. This is a wild story. And I'm going to also follow up on this story on my Substack. So subscribe to joyannereid.com. You can subscribe for free. And I'm going to post this story so you can read it. Texas man born to a U.S. soldier on U.S. Army base, deported. 10 years ago, Jermaine Thomas was at the center of a case brought before the U.S. Supreme Court should a baby born to a U.S. citizen father who was deployed to a U.S. Army base in Germany have U.S. citizenship. Last week, Thomas was escorted onto a plane with his wrists and ankles shackled, he says. He arrived in Jamaica, a country that he'd never been to, a stateless man. I'm looking out the window on the plane, Thomas told the Chronicle, and I'm hoping the plane crashes and I die. Thomas has no citizenship according to court documents. He's not a citizen of Germany, where he was born. He's not a citizen of Germany when he was born in 1986, or of the United States, where his father served in the military for nearly 2 decades, or of his father's birth country of Jamaica, a place he's never been. Thomas doesn't remember Germany. He says he thinks his first memory is Washington State, but he moved around so much in his military family, it was hard to keep track. Basically, what happened is he was arrested for a minor thing and something to do with his dog. And this was used to then pick him up and deport him to Jamaica. And the claim is that he has no citizenship anywhere. He's a citizen of nowhere. This is the world that we're living in these United States in the year of our Lord 2025. And that brings me to this Supreme Court ruling that just happened today. This is on top of a series of Supreme Court rulings that we've seen that have really maximized the power of the presidency. This is a Supreme Court majority that clearly believe in a monarchy, and they would like that monarch to be a Republican named Donald Trump. This ruling that we want to unpack is a little strange. It's kind of hard to understand. But this is what the New York Times reports. The Supreme Court has limited judges' ability to issue nationwide injunctions in a win for Trump. The decision could reshape the way U.S. citizenship is granted, even if temporarily. The Supreme Court on Friday limited the ability of lower court judges to block executive branch policies nationwide, opening the door for a majority of states to at least temporarily enforce President Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. With their decision, the justices appeared to upend the ability of a single federal judge to freeze policies across the country. The powerful legal tool known as a nationwide injunction had been used frequently in recent years to block policies put in place by both Democratic and Republican administrations and gave rise to charges of judge shopping. But the immediate effect of the 6-3 decision, which was written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who just like 10 minutes ago, a lot of pundits on the sort of Democratic side were praising as if she's had some sort of change of heart and has become a liberal. Not so. And split along ideological lines, was to give Mr. Trump a major, if perhaps temporary, victory in his efforts to redefine citizenship in the United States. The justices did not rule on the constitutionality of the executive order signed by Mr. Trump in January, which seeks to end the practice of automatically granting citizenship to anyone born in the United States, even if the parents are not citizens. That question is likely to come back to the Supreme Court, perhaps as soon as next week. Of course, the three liberal justices, Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, dissented in this case because it opens the door to allowing a single person, the President of the United States, to decide if you're a citizen or not, to decide if Zohran Mamdani, who was naturalized a citizen at 7 years old, is still a citizen. If he displeases the king, can he be denaturalized? Can this man who was born on a U.S. base in Germany, which technically means you're a U.S. citizen, note that the late John McCain was born in Panama on a U.S. base to citizen parents. Therefore, he's a citizen, right? But according to, I guess, Donald Trump, if he's displeased with John McCain, which he was, could he just say, now you're Panamanian? I'm going to send you off to Panama. Like, this is incredible power to give a president of the United States. We have some really great guests to talk to tonight. And we're going to bring them on shortly to really sort of get into this, because it's the actual frightening possibility that we're now looking at a Supreme Court which doesn't believe that Section 3 of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, Article 3 of the 14th Amendment, means what it plainly says it does. That no one who is an insurrectionist, who foments an insurrection, can serve in political federal office. They negated that. They wiped it away for Donald Trump to allow Donald Trump to serve, despite being accused of insurrection. The state of Colorado adjudicated this case in their Supreme Court and said he is an insurrectionist, therefore he cannot be on the Colorado ballot. The Supreme Court majority, the John Roberts majority, said, oh, no. That doesn't apply to Donald Trump. Maybe it applies to somebody else, but it sure don't apply to him. And they've made these decisions, including allowing Donald Trump to continue to deport people. This is another ruling this week, to deport people to countries they've never been to, just like they did to this young man in Texas who's now suddenly in Jamaica, where he knows no one, where he's never been, he's never set foot there. But because his father was Jamaican and was a naturalized citizen, they've decided he's not a citizen because he was physically born in another country, but the father was a naturalized citizen. I don't get it. The father served this country in the United States Army for nearly 20 years, and they're still saying that black guy's not a citizen, so we don't want him. They've also allowed the Supreme Court did, allowing the Trump administration to continue deporting people to countries they've never been to. And they've chosen countries like Libya, South Sudan, which is in the midst of a near civil war, El Salvador, and all sorts of other countries who I guess they're paying cash money, bounties, to take them. So we're looking at a crisis, I think, of democracy in this country, where you cannot count on the Supreme Court, which traditionally people of color have relied on as the backstop to civil rights. What I'll say is, here we are in Jackson, Mississippi, where during Medgar Evers' time, it was common to go to the federal government, to go to the Supreme Court, to look for relief when state governments denied people civil rights. But now, a whole different world. Do we have our guests? I believe we do. Let's bring in the great Sherrilyn Ifill, the former Chief Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund. She is now at Howard University, leading the charge on educating the next generation of legal scholars. My friend, a wonderful, brilliant human being from the great from the great city of Baltimore, Sherrilyn Ifill. Are you there?
I am here.
So I tried to listen to a description, unpacking this Supreme Court decision limiting single federal judge's ability to do nationwide injunctions. I didn't quite understand it. I just read it again to our audience here, but can you explain in layman's terms what this decision means?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, well, let me start at the beginning and then I want to put it in context of what we've seen really over the last week. So, to begin with, the President Trump issued an executive order earlier this year purporting to remove from the protection and the guarantee of birthright citizenship a set of individuals who are born in the United States but who do not have a parent who is a permanent legal resident or a citizen. Now, that is directly contrary to the words of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1868. The opening line is all persons born in the United States or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States and of the state in which they reside. In 1898, the Supreme Court addressed the question of whether the children of undocumented migrants, that is, of migrants who could not become citizens, and at that time, the Chinese were not able, they were legally barred from becoming citizens of this country. So the parents are not citizens, right? And their child is born in this country. And the Supreme Court said, yes, that child, in accordance with the birthright citizenship provision of the 14th Amendment, is in fact a citizen. The language subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which was argued at that time and which Trump now argues, excludes certain people like the children of migrants. The Supreme Court recognized that that language was there for the children of diplomats and others who actually are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. As you know, you've heard of diplomatic immunity, you know that, right? So that's what that was meant to refer to, or children who were born in a prisoner of war camp on US soil. But it was not meant to refer to the children of migrants. And in fact, when the 14th Amendment was ratified, the founders actually talked about whether or not it would apply, for example, to the children of Chinese laborers, and the answer was yes. So Trump issues this EO at the beginning of this year to exclude children who don't have at least one parent who is a legally permanent resident or a citizen who's born here. Of course, it is challenged. It is challenged in Trump versus Casa. It's challenged by attorney generals. It's challenged in a number of cases. And in each of the three cases, the federal district court judge, the trial court judge, before whom this case is filed, issues an injunction. An injunction is an order from a court that either tells you to do something or stops you from doing something. In this case, the injunction was to stop the administration from proceeding with enforcing the EO, the executive order, whilst the trial was pending in the case. Each of those judges issued a nationwide injunction, or what we call a universal injunction, meaning nowhere in the country could the president enforce the executive order. This is a case where that seems like a very obvious thing to do, because of course you don't want to have a hodgepodge of citizenship status depending on where you are in the country, right? You don't want an injunction in Maryland so the EO can't be applied, but then ICE is rounding up babies, and toddlers in Iowa. So the nationwide injunction makes sense so that we have a uniform policy regarding citizenship in the United States, which is, of course, what the 14th Amendment was designed to do. The Trump administration took this case to the Supreme Court solely on the question of whether the federal court, the federal district courts, have the power to issue nationwide injunctions. Now, this was a sleight of hand, very clever, because, of course, this is a losing case. Anybody reading the text, if you're a textualist, if you're an originalist, if you can read, you know that this EO is contrary to the words of the 14th Amendment. So, you essentially have a situation in which Trump goes straight to the Supreme Court, not on the core issue of the case, but on the issue of whether or not federal courts can issue nationwide injunctions. Why does he do that? Because this is a favorite issue of the far right. Conservatives have been angry about nationwide injunctions for years. Now, interestingly, they were not so angry when nationwide injunctions were issued to stop some of the initiatives that President Biden sought to advance, but they have been for some time agitated about this idea of a federal district judge having this power. So that's the issue that he brings to the court, and that's the issue that the court decided. Now, you're going to hear a lot of pundits saying, therefore, we don't have anything to worry about because they didn't touch birthright citizenship. They didn't say anything about birthright citizenship. But if you look at the facts of this case and then you place it in the context of what we have seen this past week, you understand that this decision is very, very troubling indeed. And this is why Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, why Justice Sotomayor, why Justice Kagan dissent in this case, why Justice Jackson issued her own separate dissent, which the majority derides, because they recognize the danger of this case. Think about two scenarios, Joy. First of all, by simply saying there can be no nationwide injunction, it means that every individual child born here who believes that Trump may try to scoop them up as part of this EO has to bring their own case. They have to get their own lawyer, they have to file their own case, and they have to get an injunction from a district court judge if they want to be safe during the period in which they're challenging the merits of this EO. That's one option. Second option, which we're already seeing play out today, is that lawyers file what we call a class action. Class actions are basically aggregated litigation, when a number of people come together who have similar claims to bring the claim together as part of one piece of litigation. We use it in civil rights cases all the time, right? So if children are being discriminated against in schooling, if there's discrimination in an employment space, we might bring it as a class action. The problem is the Supreme Court hates class actions. And I was there at the oral argument in this case, in the Birthright Citizenship case, when I heard them bandying about talking about class actions. First of all, the Solicitor General, that is the attorney who would handle this for the federal government for Trump, made clear that even though he was arguing that the CASA plaintiffs should pursue a class action, he will oppose class certification, a certification of that class action when and if they do that. Secondly, it is no secret to those of us who litigate in this space that many federal, particularly appellate courts, and the Supreme Court in particular, dislikes class actions and absolutely dislikes nationwide class actions. So we already have at least 2 lawsuits that have been filed by organizations like the ACLU, Defending Democracy, LDF, one filed in New Hampshire, one filed in Maryland, 2 class actions now pending, and that's important. But we should understand that those cases are going forward, and the first thing that will have to happen is the federal court will have to grant class certification to allow this to move forward as a class action, and that will have to be upheld in the Court of Appeals, and then we will see whether this case can even proceed as a class action. So essentially what the court does is, by using procedure, they essentially allowed Trump to be able to move forward. Think about if you live in Texas and you're one of these kids. First of all, you'd have to find your own lawyer and proceed with the case. If you try to bring it as a class action, how successful are you likely to be if you file it in certain jurisdictions in Texas and then you appeal it to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals? So this is not going to be an option everywhere in the country, which is exactly what they wanted by striking down the ability of federal district courts to issue nationwide injunctions. Now, when you put this in the context of what this court has done the last week, just a few days ago, allowing for the deportation of individuals to third countries with which they have no connection whatsoever without being able to challenge being sent to that particular country and without being able to raise the possibility of being subjected to torture or other unsafe conditions in that country. And then you put it together with what we have been seeing for the last 6 weeks with masked ICE agents running down women, men, children, and taking them into custody. Now you put all of that together with this decision. It's interesting to see the kind of wide-eyed, innocence with which Justice Barrett seems to write the majority opinion. There's no context. She never touches on this attempt by the president to step to the Constitution and overcome it with an executive order. There could have been one line in this opinion that even gave a nod to the fact that the president is not likely to prevail on this claim. We saw that when the Supreme Court wants to talk about a fact scenario that's not before them, as they did the other day when they wanted to reassure everyone that the Federal Reserve chief could not be removed, even though others in other agencies could be removed. We know that the court is willing to step out and talk about things that are outside the four corners of the case when they want to. So why in this case, when we think about the implications of it, and we have this kind of conduct from the executive, why would we have a majority opinion in which they pretend that the context of this particular nationwide injunction simply doesn't exist?
Yeah. Well, and for the same reason, probably, that they didn't even bother to write anything when they issued the ruling allowing Donald Trump to continue rapidly deporting people to countries they didn't come from. Only those who dissented decided to speak up. John Roberts thinks that he can preserve his Tea Party in invitations and thinks he can still get invited to the nice parties in Washington if he's not an open fascist like his friends. And I'll put that on myself, not you. I want to read a couple stories just for our audience, just so that you guys understand that the idea that the right keeps putting forward is that it is the brown people, it's Mexicans, it's Hondurans, it's Chinese people, it's Asians, it's all the brown people that scare them, it's Africans that are coming over here, that are cannibals, as Donald Trump says. They're Hannibal Lecter. That's why he keeps talking about that. In the state of Florida, this is a story from 2019. This is something we covered a lot on AM Joy. And this is from the Associated Press. Every year, hundreds of pregnant Russian women travel to the United States to give birth so that their child can acquire all the privileges of American citizenship. They pay anywhere from $20,000 to sometimes more than $50,000 to brokers to arrange their travel documents, accommodations, and hospital stays, often in Florida. While the cost is high, their children will be rewarded with opportunities and travel advantages not available to their Russian countrymen. The parents themselves may benefit someday as well. And the decidedly un-Russian climate in South Florida and the posh treatment they receive in the maternity wards, unlike dismal clinics back home, can ease the financial sting and make the practice seem more like an extended vacation. The Russians are part of a wave of birth tours that include a sizable numbers of women from China and Nigeria. President Donald Trump has spoken out against the provision in the U.S. Constitution that allows birthright citizenship and has vowed to end it, although legal experts are divided on whether he can actually do that. But here's the funny thing about this story. Donald Trump claims to oppose that, what I just described to you, birth tourism, where people come from other countries, a lot of them from Russia, in order to give birth to an American so that they can have the benefits of American citizenship along with their American child. Guess where a lot of these Russians like to stay when they come here to do birth tourism in South Florida? Trump properties. Trump has become one of the most popular hosts of Russian birth tourists in the country. He also uses lots of H-1B visa holders, people who are in the country, to work for Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, at the places where he works. And if they happen to have a kid while they're here, they're also citizens. Let me ask you, Sherrilyn, because that is the thing that the right constantly says must be ended, that people from all these other countries, and in their mind just brown and black people, come here and give birth to Americans. But what I just described to you that Russians are doing, under the Constitution, are those children citizens?
Absolutely. If you are born on this soil, you are a citizen. But here's the thing, Joy, as we've seen again the last 6 weeks with the actions of ICE, it's all in the enforcement. Do you honestly think that there are no, as you say, Russians or Belarusians or others,
Slovenians,
Slovenians,
maybe a
shall
Slovenian or
we
two.
say, or French or Germans who have overstayed their visas? Do you see ICE running after them on the street, tackling them and putting them in the back of a van? No, you don't. So we can say that. We know that that is true. But the reality is, as we see on the streets every day, that they are targeting Black and brown. This is a giant racial profiling program that allows them to um, quell their irrational fears of being overtaken in this country by Black and brown people. That's why he wanted Canada to be the 51st state. That, all of this is an effort to shore up the white population. It is lunatic, it is unhinged. But what is disturbing about it is that when a president is this flagrantly willing to step to the clear text of the Constitution and the Supreme Court is silent, they are silent about it, and all of the other atmospherics around it, they're giving him the green light. This president doesn't hide what he is trying to do. They cannot credibly claim that we are making a decision, as Justice Gorsuch likes to say, for the ages. That's what he said about the insurrection case, right? For the ages. The immunity case. This was a president who was actually violating the law, who was engaged in that process. So you can't pretend you don't know what he's going to do with a decision that says he cannot be held accountable even for crimes. You cannot pretend you don't know what is going to happen. And if you heard the president today, he said, great, now we can start getting at some of these people who have to get out. And of course, he said he misinterpreted the 14th Amendment by saying that the birthright citizenship was meant for the babies of slaves. Now, I want you to notice how much the word slaves is going to be used by him and by Chris Rufo and by Stephen Miller. They love using that word. That is an inaccurate reading of the first sentence of the 14th Amendment. It was designed to ensure the citizenship of Black people, for sure, both enslaved Black people and free Black people. It had nothing to do with babies. Nobody was thinking about babies. They were thinking about Black people who, under the first Constitution written by the original framers, who everyone loves so much, Hamilton and Jefferson and Madison and all of those guys, Black people were still being counted as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation. And the Supreme Court, the precursor to this Supreme Court, headed by Chief Justice Roger Taney of Maryland, had declared in the Dred Scott decision that Black people not only were not citizens, but could not be citizens, rendering not only enslaved Black people in the 3 years prior to the Civil War unable to be citizens, but also rendering free Black people stateless persons. And so we needed birthright citizenship to ensure that Black people were not only free as they were under the emancipation, not only could not be enslaved as was the language of the 13th Amendment, but needed to be citizens and full first-class citizens, for sure. But as I said earlier, they also debated the issue of whether children of migrants, children of workers who were from another country, if they were born here, would be citizens. And the answer was yes. So we understand that the clear language does not support the EO, and the legislative history does not support the EO, and the intention of the framers, which was to ensure there was no caste system in our country, that we did not have tiers of citizenship, that language is violated by a system that Trump has developed, in which to be merely seen on the street and be perceived to be Latino can mean that you are chased by ICE agents. And we have seen how many people have been citizens, how many people have been Native Americans, right? We have seen Black people who have been taken into ICE custody who are citizens. And now when we add to it this president's desire to send deportees to third-party countries that they have no connection to, and countries to be placed in prison, like in El Salvador with the notorious CICOT prison, where they are disappeared. We are now a country that disappears people. And I'm a little alarmed that no one seemed to ask about it today when the president was meeting with representatives from the Congo and from Rwanda, because those are two other places that he has talked about sending prisoners in this country. And please remember that what Trump said to the prime minister of El Salvador. He said, you need to build more prisons because now we need to get the homegrowns. And so he's talking about U.S. citizens who are in our prisons.
And I will note that, we tried to forget about him, but Ron DeSantis is still governor of Florida. He took the Comfy Couch hosts on a tour of the concentration camp that he's building in Florida in order to round up brown people, and throw them in a camp because he doesn't want them in Florida. Surprise, surprise, the economy of Florida is going to be severely harmed by rounding up brown people who, by the way, all over this country, Latinos are afraid to go to work. Anybody who is perceived or looks Latino is afraid to go to work. I know people who are not Latino, but they're brown, and so they look Latino to the naked eye, if you don't know any better, who are walking around with their passports, who never leave home without a passport. Because this is a question I want to ask the audience. How would you prove you're a citizen? If ICE came up to you and dragged you off, how would you prove it? I mean, do you have any proof that you're a citizen? There have been even cases where people showed their real ID with a little star in it, and that still wasn't believed. They've still been rousted. They've still been harassed. And even if you're not actually taken into custody, imagine being a brown person in this country right now, where you can't even walk the streets without fear of being tackled by random people with masks on. That's who we are now. This is like being in apartheid South Africa in the 1980s. I want to note for you guys just for a moment, Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz, that's his real name is Rafael. He goes by Ted. Rafael Cruz was born in 1970 in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. His father, Rafael Sr., is from Cuba. He was born in Cuba. He's a naturalized citizen. His mother is from Delaware. She's a white American woman. When Ted Cruz was running for president, far-right people said maybe he can't be president because they're not sure how much of an American he is. Marco Rubio's parents were both born in Cuba. They came to this country. He used to try to claim that they came to escape Fidel Castro. That's not actually true. They came during the Batista era. And they came to this country, and he was born here. So he is an American citizen by birthright citizenship. That's literally why he's a birthright citizen. I mentioned John McCain. John McCain was born to American parents on a U.S. military base abroad. He's a citizen by virtue of the same system of birthright citizenship. He's an American because he's an American. I wonder if, the next time Donald Trump has a beef with Elon Musk, are Elon Musk's kids citizens? Is X a citizen? Because his mother, whose name goes by Grimes, the singer, she's Canadian. And Elon's a naturalized citizen. If Trump gets mad at him again, what he wants for himself is the ability to just say, you're not a citizen anymore, and delist him as a citizen and send him back to South Africa. By the way, they don't want him. And I want to go to Donald Trump himself. A lot of people in the chat talking about Melania, who is a naturalized citizen who Trump got a genius visa for. I'm not sure what her genius was in order to get a genius visa, but she got one. She also got her parents through family citizenship. She extended that citizenship out of her mom and her sister.
Chain migration.
For chain migration. Exactly. So she came through that way. But Donald Trump himself, her husband, his father, Friedrich Trump, came from Bavaria. He was a barber from Bavaria who apparently also did some pimping for a while in Alaska.
Joy, let me stop you. That's his grandfather.
Yeah.
So it was his grandfather, not his father. Yeah.
Friedrich.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. The grandfather. Friedrich Trump came here in 1885. 18-year-old German barber boarded a ship on a one-way trip to America, escaping 3 years of compulsory German military service. He'd been a sickly child, unsuited to hard labor, and feared the effects of the draft. So he was a draft dodger. So Friedrich Trump came to this country. He was also and I don't know if he even became a citizen, but his father then was born here. Fred was born here. But Donald Trump comes from immigrants. I believe his mother was a Scottish immigrant. So the immigrant, it's interesting to me, Sherrilyn, that some of the people who are the most vehemently anti-immigrant, my understanding is that Ron DeSantis's grandmother came from Italy just after, she came in just after or just before, I should say, the draconian immigration acts in the 1920s that would have kept her out as an Italian. These people themselves are the children of immigrants or the grandchildren of immigrants, as is Stephen Miller. Your thoughts?
And that is what actually, Joy, reveals the racist nature of the project, right? They know, their presumption is that those people are citizens, right? Uh, you know, they are not hiding the ball at this point. They're making it clear that this is not about citizenship, it's about belonging. And belonging is different than citizenship, because you can be a citizen and still not be seen as belonging. And that's what they're trying to establish. They're trying to establish a system in which, if you are white, there is a presumption of belonging and of legitimacy to your presence here. And if you are not, white people have the right to question your legitimacy here. And but you're so right to point out the hypocrisy of the individuals. Someone like Marco Rubio, he knows the story of his parents. One thing you didn't include is that his grandfather also immigrated here and received a deportation order and remained after that deportation order. I have not heard one reporter ask Mark Rubio whether he thinks during that period when his grandfather had received the deportation order and had yet not left the United States, whether he would have been comfortable with his grandfather being treated the way we see people on the street being treated by ICE.
But by the way, can I stop you for
Yeah.
1 second, Sherrilyn? Christopher Rufo, the guy who is the author of the anti-DEI policies, the anti-immigrant racist policies trying to essentially whiten the United States population by ending any sort of assistance or academic access for people of color. His wife came here, I want to say from Thailand, and was in the country illegally. I'm going to read you a tweet from Christopher Rufo, dated November 16, 2018. I'm also going to put this on the Substack at joyanreid.com. Don't worry, you're going to get all of this back up on there. There have been rumors circulating that call into question the harassment against my family. Here is a statement from my wife, Sufatra. I came to the United States as an undocumented immigrant in the late 1980s. My mother brought me here to escape abuse and human trafficking in my native Thailand. I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire where we were the only minority family. I experienced a lot of intolerance growing up. I remember being refused service in a restaurant. I remember boys holding back the doors at my school so I couldn't get in, yelling, "Go back to your country." I remember the school librarian asking me if I was a child prostitute in Thailand. I remember my college boyfriend being stopped at a grocery store and asked if he had purchased me abroad. Christopher Rufo's wife is a Thai former undocumented immigrant. You could go to JD Vance, whose wife, I believe her mother, also came here as an immigrant. And what is the guy's name? Ramaswamy, Vivek Ramaswamy. His parents were both immigrants from India, and the father never became a citizen. So he only has one naturalized citizen parent, and he is for total, end of quote unquote illegal immigration.
So first we have you are legitimate because you're John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader. His maternal grandmother is from Canada and his paternal grandfather is from Norway. So all of these people who used to brag about being the grandson of immigrants and the great grandson of immigrants, they used to brag about it, right? These same people are acquiescing in this project of Trump's to declare certain people illegitimate and not belonging. And we have to understand, and this is where, Joy, we lost so much traction and so much time, because when people like me were trying to get the mainstream media, not you, Joy, but the mainstream media to recognize that racism and white supremacist ideology was at the core of the Trump project and at the core of his appeal in 2015 and 2016, they would not listen. They insisted that this was not true. It wasn't until Charlottesville that they began to even think that the project that was at the heart of Trump's ideology was a white supremacist project. And because we lost all of that time, because the alarm bells were not heeded, because the alarm bells didn't come from the people who are supposed to be expert, didn't come from the tappers and the people who the Ezra Kleins, and we hang on their every word, in the mainstream media, we were ignored. And now we can see it. But look, he has the full reins, and he has a 6-member majority on the Supreme Court that seems prepared to allow him to proceed with this project. You could not watch what we have seen around this country over the last 6 weeks with masked ICE agents running after people, chasing them through fields, rolling them on the ground and threatening them, beating up the father of 3 United States Marines. You couldn't see that and think for 1 second that a decision that you issue today might mean that those same ICE agents might be going after toddlers, right? Whose parents, who don't have 2 permanent resident or citizen parents. That's essentially what you're saying. And so when Amy Coney Barrett tries to push back against Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent in pretty harsh terms, and almost tries to gaslight Justice Jackson by making it as though Justice Jackson, not a wild-eyed flamethrower, right? Someone who has very carefully unfolded a very distinguished legal career and who has been a judge for a very long time, to suggest somehow that she's being hysterical. That was essentially the tone of Justice Barrett's opinion when she is referencing Justice Jackson's dissent, is completely disingenuous. It is gaslighting, because Justice Barrett didn't have the courage to speak in that majority decision about the consequences of the decision, right? And we're seeing this with the Supreme Court. They just say whatever they want to say, throw it on the table, and good luck to the rest of you. To not even think about or anticipate what the consequences might be. We saw this with Dobbs. We saw this with SSFA. We're seeing it with with the decision last week about the third-party deportation. There's not a section of the decision when they say, this is what may happen, and of course we expect the following and the following. So the mere fact that Justice Jackson is prepared to talk about the consequences of the decision drives Barrett into a tizzy and pushes her to kind of disparage the intellectual and rational decision-making of Justice Jackson, when any rational person can understand what the consequences of this decision would be. And by the way, as I said, I was in the room. Those consequences were presented to the court at oral argument. They all heard them and they all engaged with them. And so part of what disturbed me about this decision today was the court essentially taking this pilot-like stance of washing their hands of the consequences of this decision by merely talking about the power of district courts, the Judiciary Act, the history of judicial power, and so on and so forth, without ever touching the consequences for actual human beings, and thinking that that makes them superior as judges to someone like Justice Jackson, who can meet them historical analysis, originalist and textualist analysis toe-to-toe, but also understands that these decisions have consequences in the lives of real life people, and is not afraid to explore what those consequences are.
Sherrilyn Ifill, so appreciate you. And by the way, and could run rings around Amy Coney Barrett's, unqualified behind, who should not even be on the court. She's nowhere near the intellectual equal of Justice Jackson. She's nowhere near the career equal. She's had very little time in terms of her judicial career versus Justice Jackson, who's had this broad career and who's this brilliant genius. Sorry, Amy. You don't have the range, mommy. Sherrilyn Ifill, who I think would have been an incredible member of the United States Supreme Court. I thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, my good sis. We're going to keep the fight up.
Thank you, Joy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to note for our audience here, Justice Jackson apparently doesn't understand the power that she's giving Donald Trump and the leverage that she and her friends are giving them over her. Justice Jackson has 2 adopted Black children, not 1, but 2. I believe came from Haiti. Donald Trump at any moment could say to Justice Jackson, you do what I say, or maybe them kids are not citizens anymore. Maybe we'll take those citizens citizen, maybe take your two children's citizenship away. Maybe he can say to Christopher Rufo, you do what I say, you obey me, or maybe your wife gets deported back to Thailand. He could say to Ted Cruz, you want your daddy to stay here? You do what I say, you vote how I say, you vote for my big, beautiful bill, or you and your dad are going back to Cuba. What this Supreme Court is doing, maybe without knowing it, they're giving him the power of life and death over any American he wants. They're turning him into a king. And they're giving away leverage that can at any moment be used against them. JD Vance, you will obey, or that lady that you're married to might not be here. She might be on a plane to Bhopal tomorrow morning along with her mom and dad. You will obey Donald Trump, or you will lose your citizenship. Or Stephen Miller will have the power to decide who is a citizen of the United States. I can't think of anything scarier than giving that guy the power to decide who gets to be a citizen, because he has an insane, obsessive hatred of people who are not white. Oh, I want to let you guys know, this is Jason letting me know to remind you guys that 70% of the people who watch these episodes are non-subscribers. 70%. You're not joining the family. So if you're watching, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing. It gets you in the family. It makes sure that you never miss a thing. And there's going to be really fun stuff coming up for just subscribers. So please do not be in the 70%. Be in the adorable 30%.